I've heard so many inspiring statements throughout my life. So many. Anybody like that where you feel like you've heard so many inspiring things? When someone asks you, like, what's the most inspirational thing you've ever heard, you're like, like it's hard. So I've written some down, and I have them in different places, journals, on my computer, whatever. And I grew up in a great household. I had great parents, still have great parents, and they've said so many inspiring things to me. I married the most amazing person God ever could design for me, and she says inspirational things to me all the time, right? So I get that. I get that from friends, family, pastors, whoever. I get those different things. But I was able to pull two instances with two statements that I want to share with you today that were inspirational to me, and kind of helped me continue, I guess, in my trajectory in ministry especially, and just in life and in calling. So a lot of you know, but about 13 years ago, I got really sick. Some of you wouldn't know yet, maybe relatively new to the church. And I had something called vasovagal syncope. Say that 3 times fast, you win. So I had that. Basically, my blood pressure would get really low. I would feel faint, or I would faint. I was taking ambulances for kicks and giggles at one point. I was in and out of hospitals. I had to withdraw from college at the time. I couldn't take any classes because I couldn't go, because I couldn't sit for a couple hours at a time. I was losing weight. I never left my house. I had to quit my job. All these kind of crazy things. So I was just home. It was kind of like now. But I'm kidding. But it was intense. It was one of the darkest, one of the most difficult times in my life. And at one point during that, my parents called a couple pastors to come to my house from the church that I grew up in, and they came over. And one of the pastors, he said this to me. He said, "Many, if not all, of the great people in the Bible who accomplished much for God went through a training period. This is your training period." And I'd always remembered that, and I'll never forget it, because just before I got sick, I made the conscious decision to go full on into ministry. And how many people know that as soon as you take a step for God, the enemy tries to attack you? And that's exactly what happened to me, because it's easier for Satan to prevent you from starting than to change your mind once you're already in it. So Pastor Henry, he was at my house, he prayed over me so powerfully and so just in the spirit and so just with authority. Unlike almost anyone who's ever prayed over me before. And he's praying, and it really kind of got like a wind underneath my wings, Bette Midler, and it kind of like lifted me up. And it was that shot in the arm that we kind of needed, right? Because someone in your household is sick, you're all in that, and everybody's kind of feeling that. And we won a battle that night. We didn't win the war yet, but we won that battle. And shortly thereafter, thank God, he wound up healing me physically. I remember that feeling. I'll never forget that feeling. But I dealt afterwards with all these aftershocks of like anxiety, fear, doubt, worry, nervousness, all that kind of stuff that you get that kind of attacks you. In fact, that's where my tattoo came from, because it came out of all of that. And it's a reminder to me that what God has done. But after he healed me physically, I realized that I truly needed to heal mentally and emotionally, and I started to when I made the decision to. See, I needed to put everything into God's hands in order for him to actually do all those things through me, because what I found is that the next step towards your destiny is often found on the backside of a decision. And when Pastor Henry's at my house that night, he used a couple examples of biblical men for me to kind of look to. One was Daniel and one was Joseph. And each went through a process of persecution and patience. They had many opportunities to give up, to quit on God, but they knew that their God, who by the way is also my God, would prove faithful and would come through on his promise. They made a decision to stay the course. Daniel 6:10 says, "But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with the windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to God." You see, that day, that moment, that statement, those words inspired me to bust out of quite possibly the darkest time that I had gone through. And what's amazing about God is that he doesn't just confirm things for you in the moment, but he'll confirm them for you maybe a month later, maybe a year later, maybe years later when you need them to keep you on that path that you started on. And what's incredible is we'll fast forward quickly to Church Unleashed. And for those who don't know, again, part of my history is Pastors Todd and Mary were my youth pastors back in that church that we came out of. And they've been inspiring me in all kinds of different ways to continue on. And I'm thankful for them. Get people in your corner like them. But here's what happened. 13 years ago, I'm sick, right? About 8 years later, so that's about 5 years ago, quick math, that I heard Pastor Todd say this, and I think it was in a staff meeting. He said that the enemy fights the hardest, those God wants to take the highest. And that statement was confirmation to me that what I did go through actually was a training period. I never asked God 8 years later to confirm what happened to me 8 years ago. But when you stay faithful like Daniel, God will continue to confirm in you the things that he needs to confirm in you. And just like that, those two moments were connected for me. And now every time I hear those words, I get inspired to keep going and to do better. And when we pull them out in sermons and all these different things, it helps me to remember God's faithfulness then, to predict his faithfulness in the future, right? Or to put my trust in that. So now I take the enemy's attacks as compliments. Because I feel like if I wasn't a threat to him, then he wouldn't bother with me. And the same goes for you. As soon as you take a step, as soon as you go out and do something for God, the enemy will attack. He will not just sit back. So the second guy I mentioned was Joseph. And in Genesis, we see this phrase said about him a couple times, that the Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. See, training ground and Satan's attacks often go hand in hand. But it's during those times we feel God with us the most. It's during those times we really see his favor truly, because it's during the darkest times in our lives where God's light shines the brightest for us to actually see what's going on, to actually see what he's doing. But he can't shine that light sometimes unless it's really dark. See, our training grounds appear every few steps in life. But like Daniel, when we follow God and do everything as we know we're supposed to continue to do, he will see us through. Satan's attacks also come every few steps in life, every time we get to a new level. But like Joseph, he will make us succeed in everything we do because God will always take us higher.